Hello everyone and welcome back to Bitwig Studio and Music Production. This is lesson 5.13, and in this lesson we're going to take a look at our next instrument, and that instrument is the E-Snare. So as I've mentioned with some of the other drum synthesizers, these are really trying to, I would say, emulate more of classic drum machines, so like 808, 909, 707, etc. They're not necessarily trying to get you the most realistic sounds in the world. And you can even kind of tell when you look at these that we have oscillators, noise, filter, all kind of classic analog subtractive synthesizer parameters. Now, if this was more of a physical modeled based synthesis, we'd see very different controls and parameters here, things that would actually correlate to what you'd have with a real life snare. So for example, you'd have a setting to control the actual material of the drum head. You'd be able to control what's actually hitting the snare. So like, what is it? Is it a stick? Is it a brush? Etc. You'd be able to change the tightness of the drum head, all these other sort of factors that go into an acoustic snare as opposed to one that's purely synthesized using basic analog synthesis technology. So I was going to say that up front. I'm not sure if their plan is in the future to elaborate on these drum synthesizers and make them more physical model, or do they want to keep them more in this sort of drum machine type deal. Either way, it's fine because we all know that in our samples we have a number of different snares here that we could choose from, more than I'd even like to count. And not only that, there's also a bunch in here that are emulating classic drum machines already. So you can even now go and get samples of those drum machines if you don't have access to them. But there is something that's really nice and fun about programming something in yourself. And so in this lesson, we're going to talk about this E-Snare and all of the different possibilities you have timbre-wise, and then towards the end, or maybe somewhere in the beginning, I don't know, I'm going to kind of flip it on its head and show you how this goes beyond just a basic drum synthesizer. I always want you to ignore the label, so forget that this is the E-Snare and just think of this as synth 1. When you think of this as synth 1 as compared to E-Snare, it opens up a whole lot more possibilities for you. So here's what the default sound is. Let me just turn up my headphones here. All right, pretty basic, pretty simple, and we've noticed with all of our synthesizers so far, and you'll even see this with hardware synthesizers, they're always blocked off into sections. So first we have an oscillator 1 and an oscillator 2. We have a section to control noise, and then we have a filter. So let's kind of take this back to the very beginning so that we're getting no sound. The first thing I'm going to do is take this noise, and I'm going to talk about this more in a second, but notice how this is a percent and not an actual decibel value. Okay, so that's going to be very important a little bit later, but I'm just going to pull that down to 0. And I'm going to open up these filters. Okay, perfect. So we're not getting any noise. Let's see what happens if I try to mess with this oscillator 2. So these obviously have some kind of correlation between the two of them, some sort of relationship, but as of right now, I'm not 100% sure what that is. Okay, so as you can see there, it's saying tuning offset. So clearly this is taking oscillator 1's tuning and it's offsetting it by however number of steps. So right now by 19 steps, so up an octave and a fifth. Down to just 1 step. We cannot even barely even hear that. But once we raise that to K level, we definitely can. And because this is only a difference of 1 step, we're actually hearing a little bit of beating if you listen very closely. You hear how these are detuned. And so if I actually type in like 12 here, if it lets me type it in, it's not letting me type it in at the moment. Let's see if I can hit 12 on the nose. We should have a very, very nicely tuned sounding drum. Right? So that sounds a lot better than... All right, but let's see if I pull this all the way down to 0, what happens. All right, so right away, now that you're just hearing a clicking noise, what you should think about is, why am I hearing a click noise if I have a tuning and a decay way up here on oscillator 1? Well, again, this mix is a little bit different than what you might think. This isn't like a level mix. It's actually based on percentage again. So if I'm all the way to the right, I'm 100% on oscillator 2. And if oscillator 2 doesn't have any kind of offset and decay, it's really just going to give me back this clicking noise, which seems to be the default in the synthesizer. The only way I can get rid of that clicking noise is if I pull back on this high pass filter. All right, so now we're getting nothing. There's still some signal coming in, but it's nothing we can actually register. So what if I pull the oscillator all the way back to 0%? This is now actually 100% focusing on oscillator 1. And so if I make parameters to oscillator 2, we're not hearing any changes at all. Again, percentage. If I put this up to 50-50, we're getting that even mix between oscillator 1 and 2. For right now, let's just keep it on oscillator 1 and hear the sort of sounds we can come up with. Let's turn this up. So this is the longest decay. It goes up to 10 seconds. That's a pretty common number across these synthesizers so far. And yeah, my guess is all the way at the bottom is going to be 10 milliseconds, which we can barely even hear. We'll go somewhere in the middle. And we can take a look at our tuning range. So there's a sub bass for you. All the way up to 494 hertz. Okay, perfect. Now let's actually start to introduce some of oscillator 2. I'm going to go ahead and put this up to 50-50. And you're going to actually hear something really cool when I start to introduce some decay here. Do you hear that beating? It's almost like a little bit of a wobble bass. Let me put a bit of distortion on here in case you're struggling to hear this. I'll just turn it up. Now where this is going to start to get interesting is, since we know how this beating effect works, if I start to change this offset just a little bit, the beating should increase. The speed of it. Until we're actually playing, you know, different notes way up high. But if I just tweak this just a little bit, we're actually getting like a bit of a wobble bass line, which who would have thought you could get a wobble bass line using the E-Snare, right? I mean, that's not necessarily a logical choice, but I'm going to show you guys something really interesting and really fun. You're probably never going to do this, but just so you realize it's possible. Let's turn this back down. Perfect. I'm going to actually make a clip here, and let me just turn off the preview. Let me just loop this real quick. Okay, that's going pretty fast. Let's slow it down. Okay, perfect. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go in here. I'm going to grab, let's use the step mod this time. And let's change this to 4 steps. And I'm going to change this to quarter notes. So now we're syncing up when I click play. Perfect. So check this out. I can actually adjust the tuning of this so we can actually make a bass line. All right, this is a pretty cool concept. So I'm going to go ahead and, oops, I got to drop this inside of the effects first. And let's set it to 5 if I can get it really close to 5. I'll be happy with that. Okay, good enough for me. Now what I'm going to do is as I play this back, I'm going to have it hitting different notes. So on this last one, we'll put it at 100%. We'll go down 50%, and how about down, actually no, up 25%. Since we're all the way at the bottom already, I actually can't go negative. I need to go positive. So what about this? All right, let's take a listen to this and hear what happens. So just like that, we were able to come up with a little bit of a bass line just using this step mod, messing with the offset a little bit and adjusting the tuning. So that's basically the oscillator settings there inside of the E-Snare. I'm going to pull this back up, and this time we're going to take a look at kind of mixing in noise. All right, so if I go 50-50 here on the snare, I'm going to turn the noise off. Let's open these filters up, and let's take a quick listen. Sorry about that. So as I bring this noise up, this is also working as a percentage. So if I put this all the way up to 100%, all we're going to hear is the noise. So we're not getting any of those oscillators in here at all. But as I pull it back, if I just want a little bit of noise, I can make that like so. We have this little addition to the decay slope. So if I pull this right down, it's just going to be a really sharp burst of noise. And in a lot of contexts, this actually sounds a little bit more real to me. Maybe pull this noise ratio up. All right, so like so. We also have an attack parameter here. So this is very useful if you want the transient of the oscillators to hit through before the actual noise. I don't really know how many times you're going to want to do that, but you do have the option. It's obviously very quick. It only goes up to 31.6 milliseconds, but you will hear a difference here. Let's increase the width here as well. Right, so you hear that little delay. Now we can take a look at the filter section here. First thing to be aware of is that the low cut filter does not have any control over oscillator 1 or 2. This low cut is not going to have any effect at all. So if I pull this down, let's put the tuning down a bit, and now try to adjust the low cut. Doesn't sound like it's doing anything at all. The high cut does impact the oscillators, so. And then we have a Q or a resonance control. This is again specific to the noise as far as I know. So if I pull this way up, actually no, it seems to also impact the high cut for the oscillator tunings as well. So be aware of that. It's just like when you have your EQ2 here, and we change the slope, and then we increase the resonance like so. So with the EQ2, we can go from 0 all the way up to 39.81. With this, we can actually go up to a 7.76, which is still very, very high if we look at that here. So be careful with this. If you put it way up, you can emphasize a certain part of the noise if you want, but it also will impact the oscillators as well. So just be aware of that. Trying to get like a didgeridoo type sound. That's really cool. I didn't even know that. All right, so let's actually go about trying to like make a snare sound or make something from scratch. All right, I'm going to start with my noise first. I want to get the noise sounding right, and then I'll go back and add in some oscillator if I want. Here we go. All right, right now we're getting more of just a hi-hat. All right, so that's cool for a hi-hat sound if we want it, but let's go for more of a long, prolonged snare sound. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with just that sound here. You can see how we've messed with the filter already. We can also maybe take out some of the lows there. Now let's start to get some oscillator work going on here. I'm going to set my first oscillator by pulling back on the noise. I'm maybe going to try to pull this to get it to like 7 exactly, so a perfect fifth. Actually, I don't want it to be perfect. That should be good. Okay, so I'm happy with that there. And so that's a snare sound that I'm quite happy with. Don't forget, we also can adjust the velocity sensitivity. So if we have this and we're hitting a pad or something, we could adjust any of these parameters based on velocity. So even like the high cut filter as an example, I'll pull that way back. And now if I go in and just make a few of these. Actually clear this. I'm going to actually do this the opposite way. There you go. And if you do then want to, for example, get these all coming out at relatively the same level, you're going to need to put a dynamics here. And we'll have a pretty short attack, just to let it through. Like so. So that's just a quick example of how you're going to want to work with the E-Snare. Feel free to jump into the program, mess around. I also highly recommend in these drum synthesizers looking at the presets, seeing what they drop into the effects category here. That way you have an idea of what they're doing, at least consistently. And you'll consistently see things like the bitrate, like the distortion, like the filter. And so when you're making your own presets, you might want to start by using those classic effects first and then building up to starting to do some more experimental and crazy things. So hopefully this has been of help to you guys. That's how the E-Snare works. Not as intuitive as you'd think with some of these mix controls and filters, but it is a very strong synthesizer regardless. Thank you so much for checking this out, and you'll hear from me again in the next lesson. Take care.